Hey there everybody, how we doing today? Welcome back to Cinema Recap. Today we're going to be taking a look at a French thriller film, The Mad Women's Ball. So later that night, Eugenie makes her way to the bathroom, but begins to have a panic attack in the dark. She feels the presence of another person, and almost as if possessed, she begins to breathe heavily and contort her neck strangely. Now after all that breathing, she breaks that spell and drinks from the sink, only to be snuck up on by her grandmother. Well, her grandmother ominously stares at her and leaves when Eugenie shoos her away by assuring her that she'll be out soon. Later in the grandmother's bedroom, Eugenie helps tuck her in for the night. The grandma asks about her attending Victor Hugo's funeral, and Eugenie gushes about the large crowd that was in attendance. However, the grandmother is much less thrilled about the situation and sends her on her way. So as Eugenie's walking the dark halls at night, she begins to hear strange noises coming from the other room. With only a match to illuminate the way, she investigates the suspicious commotion. And what she finds, nobody expected. It's her brother, with another man. Unbeknownst to the family, he's gay, and now Eugenie knows. So the next day, her brother leaves to attend the big debate, and Eugenie sneaks into his carriage. Théophile right away begins to protest, but Eugenie assures him that she only wants a ride to the cafe. It would be against their father's wishes, but not as much as her attending the debate. Now in the carriage, he warns her that he'll deny ever being with her, and she takes the opportunity to compliment her brother, calling him handsome. Clearly happy for him. So later on, Eugenie's walking the streets of Paris, enjoying her alone time wandering and reading. Eventually, she finds herself in a cafe with a fellow poetry fan. After some lingering looks, the man approaches her with words from the book that she's currently reading. Confident that he's won her affection, he comes onto her and begins to unapologetically flirt. She makes up an excuse that she was only looking at the book he was reading, not him, and it only slightly works before she begins to flirt back. The two are sharing some of their favorite poetry with one another, and in an attempt to see her again, he lends her his book and demands it back when she's done with it. So that night, she's reading the book by the fireplace when her brother joins her. He cuddles up next to her and the two are sharing a moment joking about their new love interest. And now the next day, their family's on a walk with another powerful family. Her brother's chatting idly with the daughter of that family, likely being arranged to marry her, while her father discusses politics with the other man. So trying to make small talk, Eugenie joins her brother's conversation and accidentally insults the woman when she expresses her distaste for balls. Well, this upset her sister-in-law-to-be and the conversation is cut short. Disgracing herself once again, her father scolds her and leaves her alone to ponder the situation by herself. So some time goes by now. It's Christmas. Théophile and Eugenie begin to decorate the house together. But when they go upstairs looking for ornaments, she begins to have another one of those breathing episodes. Whispers creep out of the corner, and she's frozen in fear. Her brother's trying to comfort her, but the only thing that he can do is wait for it to pass. Eventually, it does. But when he asks if it was the same spirit that she always sees, she tells him that it wasn't. Now, Eugenie grew up seeing some supernatural things. While her brother only knows about one recurring spirit, lately, she's been seeing more. They whisper from dark corners of the rooms, begging for help. At first, she thought she was crazy, but after reading the book lent to her, she knows that they're real, and it frightens them both. Eugenie continues to delve deeper into her studies about spirits, and time passes with the siblings, continuing to house each other's secrets. One night, while Eugenie's brushing her grandmother's hair, as she always does, she has an episode. Possessed, Eugenie drops what she's doing and begins to blindly go through the drawers of her grandmother's dresser. Completely entranced, she doesn't stop until she finds a necklace behind all the drawers. It's her grandmother's old necklace, gifted to her by her late husband. It's been missing for 40 years and thought to have been stolen. Now with a mixture of joy, fear, and confusion, the old woman asks her how she knew it was there. But the only explanation that she can muster is that her grandfather told her. Now in the morning, Eugenie's woken up by her mother, although something's off. Through tears, her mother tells her that her father has decided to take Eugenie out to the store, to which she happily agrees and begins to get ready. Well, the morning seems to be like any other, but in the wagon, the tone is different. Théophile is withdrawn, and her father looks almost endearing. It's only after she notices a luggage bag under her father that she begins to pick up on the gravity of the situation. And a quick glimpse outside the window confirms that suspicion. She's being taken to the asylum. Oh, she's begging her father and brother to reconsider, but both men are remaining silent as she's taken away by the orderlies. Her father looks on with a deep frown, and her brother vomits from the guilt of what they've just done. Well, when she gets to the asylum, she's processed, and the nurses examine her like cattle. She's protesting that she doesn't belong there, but the decision now lies solely on the doctors that examine her. She's brought over to the sleeping quarters, where she's put into a room with dozens of other women, some who are more insane than others. Now there, she meets Louise, a woman that was meant to be married but thrown into the asylum before the wedding. Now Louise tells her about the Mad Women's Ball, and while she may seem saner than others, she's still hysterical. At dinner, she gives a rundown on some of the other women there. Some are schizophrenic, others are very depressed, and some have Down syndrome. Then there are those like Louise, abused by men and locked up as a means to get rid of them. The nights are filled with nightmares and the sounds of women groaning in anguish, and in the morning, it's even more chaotic. Louise is taken away to be examined by a group of doctors, and like a show, she's hypnotized and asked to do a number of tasks by the doctors. It seems to be going as intended, but ultimately fails when Louise begins to frantically flail and fall to the ground. With no empathy towards their patient, the group of doctors leave without a second thought, leaving Louise on the ground to convulse. In the infirmary, Louise is comforted by the head nurse, Genevieve. She's assured that she did well, and when Dr. Jules comes in, he clears the room of all the other staff. Wanting to be alone with Louise, he begins to make advances towards her, and she lets him in. As it turns out, he's been courting her for some time, and has been promising to marry her, and she foolishly believes him, feeding into the idea that they will be together. With all the nurses out of the room, Jules begins to please himself in front of Louise. He blames his unfulfilled desires on Louise and touches her as he finishes himself off. Now, the other half of this movie follows head nurse Genevieve. She hurries home after work, late for a dinner with Dr. Glaise, her father. The two share a meal together, and she shares her concern about Eugenie and her intense condition. One time, Eugenie was able to speak to Genevieve's late sister. While to the others it may seem insane, Eugenie proves herself by recounting facts about Genevieve that nobody should know, such as the letters that she writes to her and the color of her sister's hair. But the situation is much too intense and frightening that Genevieve leaves the room, labeling Eugenie insane. Before we go on, like the video, smash the subscribe button, turn on that notification bell, or Slender Man will haunt your dreams. Sometime later, Louise and Eugenie are speaking to each other from their beds. The other girls jump into the convo and they all dream about what they're going to do when they finally leave this place. And on the next day, it's finally time for Eugenie to be examined by the doctor. She's remaining firm with her belief that she's seeing spirits, and angrily argues with the doctor that she's not insane. When he brushes off her beliefs, she's sentenced to hydrotherapy and labeled with hysteria. Angry with the outcome of their conversation, she only makes it worse for herself when she angrily screams at a nurse. Oh, hydrotherapy's intense. A bath full of ice is prepared for her, and despite her physically fighting back, she's thrown into that thing naked and locked in for an unknown period of time. Across from her, another woman suffers the same fate. Now elsewhere, Genevieve's walking home when she's followed by a man. Unaware of who he is, she's panicking and hurries up to her apartment building before confronting her stalker. It's Théophile. He wants to know how his sister's doing, but she's insisting on maintaining patient confidentiality. So instead, he asks her to take a book to her for him. After some pushback, she gives in and agrees to take that book and sends him on his way. So later that night, curious about the book, Genevieve reads it for herself, while Eugenie cuddles with Louise to stay warm after her nice ice bath. And on the next day, shaken by the book about spirits that was dropped off to her, Genevieve goes straight to church. Unsure of her beliefs, she goes through her day in a daze. Eventually, she approaches Eugenie and tells her about the book she got. With her curiosity officially piqued, she strikes a bargain. In exchange for the book and contact with Théophile, Genevieve wants to be able to speak to her sister. However, the book isn't enough for Eugenie. She wants freedom. A basically impossible task. Even so, Genevieve agrees to persuade the doctor. So now time passes, and Genevieve goes about her day distracted by the possibility of spirits being real. Eventually, it's Christmas, and even the asylum allows for a church service. However, it's more depressing than cheerful. Both Eugenie and Théophile attend their respective gatherings, but are only thinking about each other through the night. Now, after this wonderful church service, a woman randomly breaks out in song, and it seems like Genevieve is about to stop her, but instead she allows it. A small act of kindness on a holy day. So skip to a few days later. Eugenie and Genevieve attempt to communicate with Genevieve's sister. At first, it didn't go well. Eugenie can't form a connection to the spirit, but just before they call it quits, something comes over her. A flood of emotions fills her up, and she warns Genevieve that something's happened to her father. Not willing to take that chance, Genevieve hurries to her home quickly. And upon bursting in the kitchen, it seems like Eugenie was wrong until she notices blood on a handkerchief. Fear's creeping in, and she rushes upstairs to find her father has collapsed. Eugenie was right. Well, now fully convinced that spirits are real, Genevieve spends the rest of the day tending to her father. Him being a man of science, he questions how she was able to come to his aid so quickly. Well, she tries to avoid that question and comes up with some poor excuses before admitting that she spoke to the spirit of her sister. This angers the father, and he tells her to drop it. He insists that her sister's dead. His fear is that she herself has gone insane. It's his belief that insanity is contagious, and she's got it. Genevieve tries to argue back, but fearing that she'll make this a lot worse, she leaves him alone with his thoughts. The days are going on and on. The girls are continuing to be tortured. They're being studied and treated like animals. One day, while getting her ovaries examined, Eugenie witnesses a woman come in paralyzed from a doctor's hypnosis. Although instead of showing concern, the doctors only show curiosity. Well, this gets her mad and she has an outburst, blaming the doctors for the terrible mental and physical health. Their response? Chloroform and shut her up. Later that day, Genevieve's reporting with the doctor. He's showing little concern for his patients, giving short and blunt responses. When it comes to Eugenie, worried that she's dangerous and will contaminate the others, he prescribes her isolation. So, Eugenie is sentenced to a small, dark, and dingy dungeon where a different nurse will be tasked to take care of her. In her new room, Eugenie can feel the presence of many spirits. It's the resting place for many dead patients. And she begins to have a panic attack. Her breathing's hard and labored, almost like she's suffocating. But the new nurse assigned to her assures her that she'll leave isolation a brand new woman. A fact that's likely true, but, not in a good way. So time's going on, and Louise confides in Genevieve about the cruelty of the doctors. Eugenie has the worst of it. This sadistic nurse assigned to her constantly leaves her in the darkness and closes her only window for most of the day. She gives her disgusting food and only allows her a few seconds of light each day. Days are flying by and Eugenie is driven to the brink of insanity. Now one day Genevieve opens up her window and promises to help her because she was right about her father. That same day, the vindictive nurse comes in to tease her with fresh-baked food. Although Eugenie doesn't speak to her until the spirit of the nurse's mother comes into the room. As it turns out, the nurse put her mother in the asylum as well. More so, she died in the very room Eugenie's staying in. None of this bothers the nurse, until Eugenie mentions the son that her mother killed. Well, that broke her. She begins to cry into Eugenie's shoulder, before grabbing her by the hair and threatening her to never speak of her son again. She storms out of Eugenie's room only to run into one of the committed women in the hall. She brushes it off as a crazy person being crazy again, but in reality, she was sent by Genevieve to pickpocket the keys to isolation from her. So now Genevieve's got the key, and she goes to visit Eugenie to talk to her sister. During their communication with the spirit, Eugenie tells her that her sister wants her to stop writing letters to her, because she feels loved as is. The letters just make her sad. Instead, she wants her to go and live her life. She wants her to be happy and move on. And while she misses her dearly, she tells Genevieve that she can be found in the smile of a woman, the laughter of patience, and in her hands that heal. The two say their final goodbyes, and an emotional Genevieve thanks Eugenie for the closure. So later on, as Genevieve's about to leave, she's caught by the sadistic nurse. Well, Genevieve, being the head nurse, tells her to tend to Eugenie because she intends to free her from isolation, and the nurse reluctantly agrees. Now, when approaching the doctor about Eugenie's condition, she assertively suggests her freedom. She's been in isolation for a month, and her personality has become much more docile. Well, he decides to take her word for it and signs off on her freedom. However, he reiterates that he's the one in charge of the asylum, not her. All right. Now Eugenie's free, and a plan begins to unfold in Genevieve's head. The first person Eugenie sees when she's back in the sunlight is Louise. Now completely crippled from her treatment, Louise is bound to a wheelchair. Free just in time for the annual ball. Thea feels invited, and the women are given costumes to dress up for the ball. It's almost like they're circus animals for their entertainment. The ball kicks off, and after nearly being apart for a year, Eugenie meets her brother on the dance floor. Everyone begins to dance, and the party gets lively. In the commotion, they sneak off to the kitchen and begin their escape. All hell seems to break loose as a lot of the doctors take advantage of the women. Even Louise's lover forces himself on her. That sadistic nurse catches them in their escape, and they're forced to make a run for the front gate. It's a close call, but thanks to the help of some other women, they get away free, and Louise's assailant is stopped and beaten. Eugenie's freedom is not without cost. Despite Eugenie's pleas, Genevieve chooses to stay behind with the women. It's unfortunate, but life goes on, and while Eugenie lives freely on the coast of France, Genevieve now resides as a committed woman of the asylum, finding peace in the knowledge that her sister has found peace, and the letters sent to her from Eugenie. Wow. That was a ride. You know, the movie does show the poor state of mental health facilities, but it also shows a study, in all honesty, that's still very new to the medical world. Can't wait for science to crack the paranormal. So, if you were in Eugenie's place, what would you do? Would you play along or stick to your ideals? Let us know in that comment section below with that hashtag Cinema Recap. Till next time.